Well, welcome to Sophie & Co. Me, Sophie Shepard-Nate. Anti-government unrest in Venezuela is spiraling out of control, with every side blaming the other for the chaos. How will the government cope with this serious political crisis? We ask somebody who has a view from the inside. Andres Izara, who is a member of President Maduro's cabinet, is our guest today.
Street fighting is raging on the streets of the Venezuelan capital. With Comandante Chavez gone, his rivals are taking a shot at his successor. And the White House has already voiced its support for regime change. How will Caracas stop the violence? Is Washington's hand behind it? Or are the country's economic woes to blame? Does Venezuela's socialist dream have a future?
And Andres Izara is our guest today, a member of President Maduro's cabinet. Thanks very much for being with us. He's joining us from Caracas. So, Mr. Izara, Mr. Maduro has said we're seeing in Kiev is now being repeated in Caracas. What does he mean exactly? What is happening?
This is not a widespread violence as we are seeing right now in Kiev. It's very limited to certain focuses. Of course, the U.S. would like to create a situation like the one we're seeing in Kiev, but it is not near what is happening there right now. It's very hard to compare. Again, Venezuela just came from a recent election, local election. We've had 4 electoral processes in the last 2 years. All of them have been, with wide participation of the people, over 80% of participation in these electoral processes. The Bolivarian Revolution has won all 4 of them. We have a very solid popular support, and this is not the first time we are facing this kind of disruption in our democratic life. Remember that in 2002 we had a coup attempt following a very similar script like we are seeing right now, with violent protesters in the streets trying to topple our government.
But like you've said, your country has just come out of the presidential election like a little over a year ago. President Maduro won this election with a very small margin. Doesn't that really mean that your country is divided and he has a real opposition?
President Maduro won with 1.5% difference. It was a very special kind of election because the people were, as you know, very sad, very hurt by the loss of President Chavez, and we had a diminished participation of our people who were very, again, touched, very felt, hard feeling with what was happening emotionally to the country with the loss of President Chavez. But again, no matter how big the margin, if it was small or large, we are in a democracy, and a democratic country respects the will of the majority. After that, after the election of President Maduro, we had a second election this coming December, and the forces of the Chavista movement, of the Bolivarian movement, came out of it with a very wide majority again. So the Venezuelan people has had the chance to express its will over and over and over again. Over the last 15 years, we've had 19 elections, Sophie. There's no country in the world that has had so many elections as we have.
So I want to get back to what's going on right now in Caracas. Opposition leader Leopoldo Lopez surrendered to the authorities. He said he wants to wake the people up. Why do you think he handed himself in?
He handed himself over because there was a judge that the justice system was claiming him for his crimes, his crimes against democracy, his involvement in all the violence that we're seeing right now. Remember that although we had elections this last December, these people, Leopoldo Lopez, Enrique Capriles, they were also involved in the violence that we saw in 2002. These are people from the wealthy classes of the Venezuelan society. These are the oligarchy of the Venezuelan society. These are the political expression of the oligarchy in Venezuela. This is the ruling class, the privileged class that is against democracy, that is against the popular democracy that we are moving forward in Venezuela. So when the justice system claims Mr. Lopez for all the violence that he directed during these last days, it is a crime to do it. It is a crime to attempt against a people and against a democratic system the way he's done it, especially in a political context so democratic, so open as ours. So he is now in jail, and he will have to face a trial with all the guarantees that our justice system gives to anyone that is being charged with the charges that he's facing. And it's important to notice that Mr. Lopez gave himself up after a negotiation with the government that protected his life. He went to the justice system by the hand of the President of the National Assembly, who is one of the Bolivarian leaders, Diosdado Cabello. And that came because of the threat over Mr. Lopez's life, the threat of his life by the ultra-right factions of the Venezuelan political spectrum.
I need to ask you this. Who are these far-right movements? Who are these people? Who are these fascists that you and President Maduro are talking about?
These are people from the extreme right, related with the paramilitaries in Colombia, related to Álvaro Uribe Vélez, the head of the paramilitary and the ultra-right in Colombia. And of course, behind all of this is the interest of the United States to create a situation that brings up regime change, which has been their policy all the time against the Bolivarian revolution. Regime change. And they're using factors from the extreme right to try to provoke regime change.
But don't you fear that if he's put in prison, he could become a sort of a martyr for the opposition?
Well, the opposition is very divided. The opposition in Venezuela tends to throw away whoever doesn't work for them anymore. They've done it in the past. They had a labor leader that they used in the past to try to promote regime change. They've used governors. They just threw away Enrique Capriles because it didn't work for them, for their interest anymore. Now they're trying to they have this new leader in Leopoldo Lopez to try to bring about their policy, this extreme policy that tries to again, spread violence all over the country.
Mm-hmm. You keep bringing up Enrique Capriles, who almost won the presidential election against Maduro, and is also seen as one of the main leaders of the opposition, but he's trying to distance himself from the opposition on the street, right? Why is he doing that this time?
Well, it is surprising for me too, I have to confess, because Capriles was, he led the violent revolts after the April elections that led to the death of 11 people, 11 Chavistas, by the way. So in this opportunity, he's distanced himself from the violence, especially because he's a governor. He's a governor. He governs one of the states. It's not of his interest to promote violence because that will turn against him. He's a governor. He has to guarantee the peace of his state. He has to guarantee the peace of the state he rules, so he can continue in power in his state. In contrast to Leopoldo Lopez, who doesn't rule anything, he's just an agitator. He's just a political activist. Mr. Capriles has a lot to lose in a situation of violence.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Izarra, we're going to take a short break now, and when we're back, we'll be talking about the situation in Venezuela with a member of President Maduro's cabinet. Stay with us. And now we're back with Andres Izarra, a member of President Maduro's cabinet. He's joining us from Caracas. Right, so most of the protesters in the street are university students. As I know, the universities in Venezuela are affordable. Why then do you believe they are out there in the forefront of the protests?
Well, because the universities, the young people in the universities is where the United States has chosen to promote this kind of extremist groups. We just expelled from our country three U.S. diplomats because of their involvement in the training and organization and financing of these extreme groups that use the university as their place to gather.
Do you have evidence about those three U.S. diplomats that they were actually doing that?
Oh yes, that's why our government expelled them. We had counterintelligence, plenty of counterintelligence over their activities, and a lot of support that shows how they were involved in this kind of organization of these extremist groups.
So the students who are on the streets, are they mostly from private universities or public ones, or does it even matter? Is there a difference?
Again, the people who are protesting are not only students right now. I mean, we find by the people who have been detained, certainly young people, but there are many that are related to these extreme groups. Otpor, for example, you know, all these, Russia knows very well the experience of the color revolution, the velvet revolutions. This is the scheme that's being reproduced here. So more than students, many of them are professional political activists. Some of them have been trained for over 2 years in this kind of violence, of political actions to try to topple a government. Again, it's the same scheme that you've seen in the past in Ukraine and other countries, promoted by the U.S., following CIA directions. This is a political operation towards regime change that's going on in Venezuela right now, financed and directed by the United States.
Mr. Izarra, the world press emphasizes on economic problems in your countries, citing very high inflation, lack of goods in the stores, also extremely high crime rate as root of these protests. What are you doing to deal with these issues?
All governments, all countries have problems, have issues. We're dealing with them with different strategies. Even yesterday night, the president signed the new exchange law, another measure to try to solve all these problems and bring the economy back to an equilibrium. We've faced an economic war, also promoted by these groups of the oppositions, but nothing, no matter how big the problems might be. This is a democratic country. Nothing justifies the violence that we're seeing in certain parts of certain Venezuelan cities. This is a democratic country. We just came from an election. We'll have elections next year again for the National Assembly. Nothing justifies the loss of life and property that we're seeing right now in certain areas of Venezuela.
You've said many times that America is behind all this unrest in your country. But from what I understand, the United States is the biggest oil customer. How does it benefit from chaos in Venezuela?
Well, not only that, you know, for the last 15 years that we've had this relationship with the United States, or lack of it, what is curious is that the level of our economic activity does not correspond to our political relationship. Not only is the U.S. Our main oil buyer, but also we import from the United States the most of our necessities that we have to import. It's our main importing market. So it's a paradox that our level of economic relationship does not correspond to the political relationship. Again, the United States, first, they lack a policy towards Latin America. That is widely recognized by all the U.S. Intelligentsia, so to speak. And towards Venezuela, the only policy the U.S. has is regime change. Nothing besides that. Although we've tried in the past to try to reestablish the relationship with the United States, to bring it to a level of dialogue, of mutual comprehension, to work together towards the problems, that has not been possible. The only policy that the U.S. has towards Venezuela, in its vacuum of policy towards Latin America, is regime change, and that we do not accept. We demand from the United States to respect our sovereignty. We are determined to be independent and sovereign. There's no more, we will not accept any more U.S. intervention in our country anymore. We have been a U.S. colony for too long.
All right, so
we are decided to be free and independent.
So no, you're saying what the United States should do in order for the relations to improve. What concessions is Venezuela ready to do in order to improve relations with the U.S.?
Concessions? No. We are determined
or what should be done? I mean, it always goes both ways.
The only thing that we ask is respect. No, the only thing they have to do is respect us, respect our sovereignty, respect our political process, respect our democracy. That's what we demand. We are not asking for mercy or asking for anything else but respect for our institutions, for our political system, and for the will of our people to be independent and free of foreign domination.
But what do you think their main problem is with Venezuela? Why do you think U.S. is lacking respect towards your country, as you say?
Oh, oil. Sophie, oil. This is the largest oil reserve in the world that is now in the Orinoco oil basin, now called Hugo Chavez oil basin. It's the largest oil reserve in the world, so the U.S. is greedy like a vampire to get their hands on that oil again, because that huge reserve, certified as the largest world oil reserve, is in the interest of the United States to put its hand on. And we've said no. The oil in Venezuela, the resources in Venezuela belong to the Venezuelan people, not to the U.S. government, not to the imperialism.
So sometimes I feel like when you are fighting an almighty enemy like the United States, it somehow, in a weird way, helps you inside a country to consolidate people around the regime that some may not even like. Do you feel like the United States is helping you in a way by being your enemy to consolidate people around you and your government?
It's hard for me to answer that question. I mean, this is an objective situation that we're facing. We have the United States involved, again, in all these regime change policy. And we have denounced that, and we've faced that, we have confronted them over the past years. It was a permanent struggle of President Chavez that we have continued to be free and independent, and our people are very conscious of that. You know, our people have grown a lot during this Bolivarian revolution in terms of consciousness. And they know pretty well who is their enemy, who is the enemy of the people here.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying the constant interference from the United States into your country's affairs actually helped raise consciousness and awareness of Venezuelans. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yes. I mean, all the political struggles that we've had to do in the past to gain that independence, to gain sovereignty over our resources, to build a more democratic society of inclusion, to fight poverty. that has been done. We have had to struggle against many obstacles. One of them is the United States. The oligarchy is the other one. The cultural media hegemony has been another one. So all these obstacles, enemies that we've had to face in order to create a society, a democratic society of inclusion, of sovereignty, of independence, of liberty, in terms of the advance of our struggle, people have been growing in consciousness as we have been moving forward with our revolution, with our process.
Now, Mr. Azara, you were close to President Hugo Chavez. For the last 10 years, the country was calm and peaceful. But then with the new president facing challenges from the opposition, what is President Maduro doing differently from President Chavez?
Nothing. President Maduro is our first Chavista president. Is the president that is continuing the legacy of Hugo Chavez. We're following his policies strategically. It is the same objectives that we're following. Of course, we're adjusting tactics and adjusting based on the situation, but it's basically a continuation of the Chavez government. That's what people voted for.
What's the problem then?
The problem is that we have an opposition that does not recognize the sovereignty of the people, that does not recognize democracy. They've tried once and again to topple our government through violent ways. We've had a coup d'etat in 2003. It was followed in 2002. It was followed by a business lockout by the end of 2002, 2003, and they've always looked for a shortcut. They have not, since democracy doesn't favor them, since the vote ballot doesn't favor them, they've tried to come to power through violent means, and that's what they're pursuing right now again.
All right.
Unfortunately, we do not have a democratic opposition. We have a violent and undemocratic oligarchy-led opposition in our country.
Mr. Azara, thank you very much for this interesting insight on what's going on in Venezuela and on the unrest in your country. Andres Azara, a minister in President Maduro's cabinet, was with us, joining us from Caracas, Venezuela. That's it for this edition of Sophie & Co., and I will see you next time.